By the way, Ron, I sent you some notes pages.
I came home late and took a nap. Shooting is hard.
That's okay. If you can just send it out to everybody. Everything that I talk about, you see, this is a notes page where it's got the slide and then it's got all this other information underneath of it. You can fall asleep, and if you go ahead and then really got interested in something that I said and you want more information, the notes pages have it all. So I'm going to go to the beginning. Let's go there. You should see the title slide.
Yep.
And then I'm going to hit alternate R. All right. So I want to welcome you to a presentation about Wallace, Idaho, and the Wallace and Spokane Railway Post Office. This is for the Pacific Northwest Railroad Archives on May 7th, 2025. Wish I could be there, but this big station down at the bottom is where I'll be on May 7th, 2025, trying to do some work. It's like a house. You spend time at the house. It's the room, it's a house with many projects, and there's plenty to do. So anyway, this is what we're going to talk about. My name is Frank Shear, and we're going to talk about looks like six different subtopics. First of all, we'll talk about what the Wallace and Spokane RPO was at Wallace, Idaho. Then I'm going to talk about schedule and scheme information, post route maps, railway post office postmarks, the railway postal clerk that possibly was assigned during 1951 to this route, and then summary. We'll take about a half an hour to do this. I'm not planning on going longer unless people have questions, and what we'll do is we'll hold questions to the end. You can come off mute, and at least for the live recording that I'm doing now, if you're watching this as a recording, you're going to need to send me the messages by email of questions that you have, and I'll answer them. And my contact information will be in the last slide. So this photograph is the only photograph I'm showing tonight. And this shows Wallace, Idaho. That big mountain there, all around on basically three sides. This basically rolls into a pocket, and there isn't anything else in Wallace except for a few little outlying villages, and nothing goes over the mountain. We see a railway postal clerk that is climbing out of the car. Not railway post office related, is this standard dairy, so they're probably unloading milk cans to take to the dairy. And then the thing that's puzzling to me is actually this car right here. If you can see where I'm circling around, I got a tiny cursor, but you can see this. That looks like the window arrangement for another railway post office car. I can't explain that. That doesn't show up in the schedules of mail routes or any information that I have. It's possibly being used as a storage mail car. I really don't know, but this type of truck here, this box truck, is the type of truck that a mail messenger or a star route carrier would use. And when I show some of the post route maps going out of Wallace, Idaho, some of them were actually running out of the station with mail that they picked up from this train. So this is May 31st. We've turned back the clock, May 31st, 1951. And on May 31st, I guess I was about 6 months old when this picture was taken. Oh, the other thing that's not really railroad related, that bell, this here, I'm thinking that that's some sort of a fire watch station for the village of Wallace. I've not seen a layout of the town of how close it is, but the only time I've ever seen a bell is like for a fire department, fire alarm, and I'm suspecting that's what it is. So some of you all may have heard a previous presentation that I did that talked about railway post offices in general. And a railway post office, which is abbreviated RPO, that allowed for sorting mail in transit. That was the way in which mail really moved quickly. And because the time that you were spending transporting it was also the time that it was being sorted, so you ended up getting a lot of times same-day delivery places, or at least a much faster delivery than what we've got now. Another factoid is that airmail was a lot of times diverted to railway post offices during inclement weather. That in later years, with air route and air traffic control and better electronics in the aircraft, that became less important. But planes were still grounded, and a lot of times the mail went to a train, which was much more forgiving for bad weather. And registered mail, which was a service of first class, was under the care of one clerk. And since this is a branch line, 15-foot railway post office car, as I'll explain, that one clerk is the same thing as a supervisor and does everything in the car. Railway mail clerks were staffed by railway post offices, which staffed railway post offices or post office department employees. It's important for people to know that they're not Railway Express, they're not baggage masters, they're nothing else, they're all post office employees. Now, for this particular route, the trip length was 130 miles one way, so the same clerk worked in both directions within a single day. This is what you call a sweet job in the railway mail service, because you're basically home every night. You had to have a lot of seniority to be able to get these branch line RPOs. They were more leisurely, had a lot less mail to work than some of the trunk line runs, and you go out in the morning, come back at night, you're sleeping in your own bed. You may be working 6 days a week, but you know, it was not bad. And plus that, during the layover, in this case at Wallace, Idaho, you had a couple hours. You had plenty of time for lunch if you wanted to walk to a nearby cafe or diner or whatever. Or if you brought your own sandwich, you had that. You lay down in the car and take a nap. You know, that was basically your time, although some of the time was dedicated to sorting mail for the return run. Now, on this particular route, there was only one clerk assigned, and they, a lot of times, even though the train departed at a particular time from Spokane, going over to Wallace and then coming back, they had what they called advance time. During that time, the clerk had to set up the car with the pouches, start mail distribution, load the car with mail, and so on. So it was a long day. And so a lot of times in exchange for that, they worked maybe a couple trips on, and then a couple trips off, and then they might get a whole week off to compensate, because they were basically working 8-hour days, but the actual time that they were working and during the course of a day might be closer to 12 hours or more if there were train delays. And of course, if the clerk had mail work, they took a break or ate. That was the only time they might be able to sit down. The rest of the time, they're standing the whole time. So this is a little bit closer view, just so that you can see some of the detail. I've already sort of described some of the key features, but this is a 15-foot apartment RPO. And this is the way it's laid out. It's except that the picture that I just showed you had two windows on the side. This one only is showing one window. That's this part right here is the window in the wall. Door was here. And so you have the distribution cases here where they'd sort the mail. And then you had racks on both sides. You had overhead boxes on both sides. You had a table to open up the pouches and sacks and dump it all out so that you could begin sorting. And then this area here is called the bins. This is where you would put mail that's either been worked or will be worked. And Lord knows you sure need that hopper, okay? And there was a fold-down sink that was located right here. So very compact. It basically had all of the features of a full-length RPO, just scaled down to a much smaller amount. Now, you can always tell for, let me go back to that previous picture. Right here, you can see where I am, where it says U.S. Mail and then Railway, that right there, that's the letter slot. You could stand on the platform and mail a letter into the RPO. You didn't need to knock on the door. So that is the letter chute that's shown right here. It goes underneath the counter. The chute comes down here. The little tray it goes into so it doesn't get lost. So the clerk would pull out a postmarker, and this is a stamping pad. They're rubber and hard rubber, and you put the letter on there, give it a whack, and then away it goes. So now we're going to talk basically about schemes and schedules. Schemes are the essentially like the railroad employee timetable, and then the operating rules or procedures that railway postal clerks have. Scheme is a little different than that, really. It's a list of all the post offices that are served by a particular railway post office. Distribution schemes were issued every 4 or so years, and these general schemes had 3 parts. First of all, they list all the post offices. Then they group them by county and show the mail route supplies, and then they show the separations. So I'm going to show some examples of that later on. And then schedules, well, the schemes are basically routings. They are how you route mail within the mail transportation network system. And in fact, post offices are still doing the same thing today. You have all this fancy machinery. All these scheme information is actually in programs in the machine to know that if it sees a certain zip code, it sorts it to a particular chute that the mail comes out in, and then it gets dispatched to a particular way. There are still schemes, it's just they're all electronic now, and that's what one of the things that makes postal history research now very difficult, is because it's all in a computer, it changes every day. No record is kept of it. Whereas in this age of the railway mail service, there were bound books, they were reissued, and they were also updated weekly. So there's a lot to go on. I could tell you more about how mail moved in 1930 than I can, or will be able to, in 2030. And after 1954, they were loose leaf, and so they were throwing away a page at a time. So that's when it really started getting difficult. So these are post offices out of a general scheme of Idaho that the Wallace and Spokane was serving. And they're all grouped, but then for some of these, they had a direct pouch coming out of Missoula or Spokane, going to that post office or that group of post offices. So although they were making up mail in the railway post office, you had these other supplies, mainly in Montana and Spokane, that were sorting mail to these smaller communities. And then there's things that, like, for example, Kellogg here, it's got a little note. It says by Wallace, and then there's a star route going from Coeur d'Alene to Spokane. And then Page is getting service from Kellogg. So, you know, there was a lot to learn. All this had to be memorized. A good railway postal clerk had to know basically the distribution for about 10,000 post offices in their examination assignment. And on lines that had more than one railway post office train, that varied by train. It wasn't all the same. And it also was not the same by direction. You're going east, you had to know schemes in one direction, you had to know schemes and routing for the train going back in the opposite direction. There was a lot of study that was required, and then you throw in weather delays or any other problems, and on the fly you had to make a decision about what the next best routing would be. So at the back part of the scheme, it shows separations, and so basically they divided up this route into 3 portions. Any number 1 mail is worked first, going out of Spokane. So number 1 mail up to Tekoa, and then the next location was Cataldo. Any post office between Tekoa and Cataldo was grouped together, and then Cataldo to Wallace was the 3rd group of mail. So the mail that was put into pouches wasn't just randomly thrown in. They had to be shown as number 1, number 2, number 3 mail, so that the clerk could, when opening the pouch, know what they got to work first, and then what they're going to work second and third, based upon where they are in the route. Now, the railway mail service was originally organized with 6 divisions, and the first schedules, even though the railway mail service was established in 1864, it wasn't until 1877 that they started printing schedules of mail routes. For that period of time prior to 1877, every clerk had to come up with their own schedules. They might get some sort of public timetable for the railroad. They might clip out advertisements in newspapers that showed what the schedules were for trains. Everybody was freewheeling, and that was very disorganized. So in 1877, the railway mail service got a little bit more formalized and started printing schedules. And originally they were just one-sided sheet of paper, then they became little booklets. The 13th division, which is where this route is, the Wallace and Spokane, that was split off of another division, which is California, Nevada, and so on in 1909. And that was primarily because the population, railroad mileage increased in the Pacific Northwest. And then they, like schemes, also transitioned to a loose leaf format. So this is the elements of a schedule. It shows the name of the route. That star next to Wallace means that the route had a registered mail key. They could open up pouches of registered mail and sort it. If you had a route that did not have a star, or of course any closed pouch route, then they were not able to sort mail. And then it says, tells you what the name of the railroad is, how many miles. Miles are important because that was the basis for compensation. And then for this particular route, you left on train 67. The A, small a, means daily including Sunday. So basically 365 days a year this trip was operating. It ran out of Spokane Union Station at 8:15 in the morning, but the clerk probably was in there by 7 o'clock, if not a little earlier, on advance time, setting up the car. Got to Wallace, Idaho, and then he had a nice hour and 15-minute layover. The train was on time, and then came back, got back home or back into Spokane at 6:50. And after the train, the RPO was unloaded, then, they were free to go home. So didn't quite get a full 12 hours of sleep, but you typically ran, maybe a couple trips on and a couple trips off. So there was at least usually 2 or 3 clerks assigned to this run. It wasn't one person doing all 7 days a week every day. I also want to point out this isn't in all schedules for all years, but where you see the colon here, this is where it was making a nonstop exchange, which is a mail catch row. This 15-foot shows that the space of the railway post office was authorized. And then it shows that on train 68, there was additional space, 3 feet or 6 feet, 18 feet, 15 feet of storage mail that was allowed. And that was the mail that may have been in that second car. When the branch lines were being discontinued by 1951, a lot of railway post office cars, even though they still said railway post office on the side, were just moving without a clerk, and they were used for storage mail. And then, very systematically, it shows that train 67 was working Idaho mail, and then offhand, I've forgotten what the hash mark means for Montana and Washington, but well, these are what they worked, and you can see that train 68 going back to Spokane, it was working Alberta and British Columbia mail, as well as Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, Washington, and Wyoming. So they covered a lot of ground and did a lot of work. And as you can see, what you did in one direction was not the same as what you did in the other. So now, if you let me just go back here for a second. So this shows some of the stations on the route, but a railway mail service schedule only shows the principal towns or junctions and does not show everything. So that's where going to an official guide of a similar period is helpful. The closest that I could come was 1944, not 1951. So there's some variation in the time leaving Spokane, then coming back out of out of Wallace. But the times, it gives you an idea what the running time was between the places and the mileage. So the official railway guide is helpful. It doesn't tell you what trains had mail. If you knew that from a railway mail service schedule, then does give you some insight as far as what the service was to individual stations and when those trains would arrive there. Now, another very useful resource for research are post-route maps. They were made up almost annually. I'd like to say annually, but I'm not sure they really were, but almost annually in most cases for every state, and they're very detailed. They are as big as a tabletop, a kitchen tabletop, 48 or maybe even 60 inches wide and 60 inches long. Very, very large with a lot of detail. And I have some that I've scanned at, I was doing it at 300 dots per inch. You end up with a file, it's like 75 megabytes. The benefit is when you go in and you take one county, such as Shoshone County, it's legible. If you do it at a lower resolution, you can't see hardly anything. So this is showing the entire route. I've got 3 following pages I'm going to zip through that basically segment it. You have Spokane down to Tekoa, or Tekoa, whichever is the proper pronunciation of that. Then it came down, this is on the Oregon short line here. And then it came up, and this is all Union Pacific routes. Then it came on up here, weaved around like this, came through the mountains. There's mountains on either side of this. Some good fishing streams along there, I'm sure, John.
Oh, yeah.
And for those who are in the know, and then you get over here to Wallace. So, by the way, John, if you ever, John, who I'm making the presentation to tonight for this recording, if you ever go out that way and you take any pictures, I sure would like to see them. So you can see here, this was the original Oregon short line coming down here, and at Manitou, it continued south instead of going this way. And then it swung down this way, down to Tekoa, or Tekoa, and came up this way, on around. Now, the nice thing about a post route map is it shows where all the post offices are located. That's these little circles. They're not just railroad stations. These are post office locations. And that's very, very important from the standpoint of railway post office research, because that's the whole point of doing railway post office research, is knowing how the mail reached specific towns. And then I want to show you something. You know, you hear about the Postal Service, oh, they're going to change things around, and we're going to lose universal service, and Elon Musk is probably going to buy it. Who knows what's going to happen? But everybody's got this thought that mail was delivered to every post office every day, 6 days a week. And that's wrong. See this right here? The 3TAW, which means 3 times a week. Post office, it goes off the map here. This route was only operating 3 times a week. You got your mail maybe Monday, Wednesday, Friday. There's some others that, not on this particular map, that you might only get service once a week, especially up in Alaska. And that's only when it's not snowing. And in other cases, you know, it might be only 5 days a week or something less. So, you know, the idea of universal service has gotten so convoluted that universal service means every post office, but it did not mean prior to about 1985 or so, did not mean, it was not mandated by Congress to be every day. And, you know, it depends upon what the mail volume was. And we're back to that era of when mail volume is so small that you just can't really serve. This post office here in Murray had a route that was going up here. It was only operating on May 1st to October 31st. I'm sure you can figure out why. And then it had 4 times a week service from May 1st to October 31st. I don't think they had any service in the winter. I think that place is just isolated. So anyway, here's Wallace. They got a fish hatchery over here. I guess they're stocking all the rivers, John. Get your flies ready. Go on out to Idaho, out to Montana. Now, this is a very busy slide. This is where you're really digging a hole for the presenter and digging it even deeper, but I'm not going to go through it. If you get the handout that I've provided, if you're really interested in this, it shows the transitions, back and forth with name changes. This is important to people who are collecting covers, which are tangible artifacts associated with a railway post office. I'm going to show you a couple or three examples in just a minute. You got to know what it was when, for a particular cover, what the railway post office name was. Sometimes a postmarker for one stayed in use even after the time that it shows the year or date that shows that it was officially changed to something else. So anyway, this route lasted until September 1955. It was when I was 5 years old. I wouldn't know, I was 4.5. A long time ago. So this is things, I'm going to show three examples of covers. So this is what a railway post office postmark looks like. Wallace and Spokane. At the time, there were only one train going east, one train going west. So they didn't bother with train number. All they did is just said west. West being that it was coming back towards Spokane. And of course, it made good connections out of Spokane. This letter was back stamped in Hollywood, California. Now, it was mailed on August 29th. This took a long time to get there, September 3rd. That's a little bit long for the railway mail service, but there could have been all sorts of reasons why it took that long to finally get there. And the back stamp was actually on the back of this envelope. I did a little editing job and threw it on the front so I didn't have to show two different pictures. Now, this is what a later postmark looked like. This is 1939. And just for those that are really esoteric, this was manufactured by International Postal Supply. The postmarker that was shown in the previous image was made by the Chamber Shop at Lodge, Virginia. That's near and dear to my heart. But, this fella here was one of the pioneers for railway post office cover collecting. He worked at Penn Terminal in New York City, and he was sending out these cards to railway post offices. He also was seeing what changes were made across the country. And he formed one of the very earliest and largest and most complete collections. Unfortunately, it was completely dispersed, and it shows up on eBay in sales. But he always, because the clerks knew that he was collecting them, they made an effort, special effort to try to go ahead and give him a nice clear postmark. And then this one here provides a lot of insight for me. Merwin Leet is another fellow who's a collector. I knew him from afar. I don't think I ever met him, but I had correspondence with him, and he passed away several years ago. And then this postmarker is made by Pitney Bowes a little later at Stamford, Connecticut. So you see, everything's related to everything else. But the note on the back says, "Line safe as railway post office another year, May HPO or highway post office at another time or about that time, whatever." Named Sutherland. And so he was very kind. He went ahead and he changed the train numbers. So same postmarker, same date, but you've got the trip going out to eastbound to Wallace, and then you got the postmark coming back to Spokane, all on one card. That's real nice. This name, though, Sutherland, I decided to do some research. This is where it gets interesting about the individual clerks. Maybe that's the guy who's stepping out of the car in that picture, maybe not. But with a name like Sutherland, it's not common like Mr. Smith or Williams. No, Sutherland, and doing an ancestry search for Sutherland for Spokane, Washington. And I could guess that he was probably about 40, maybe 50 years old. So that gives me an approximate year. Pop this up. It turns out that he was born on in 1899. It shows here, this is his draft registration card. and shows that he was working for the post office department, chief clerk, railway mail service. He's a chief clerk, not the chief clerk's office. They knew where he was all the time, even though he was out on the road. His whole name, William James Sutherland. So even though he just signed Sutherland, you can track, if you get information like that, you can do that. And he lived until 1969. So there's a lot of information that you can get. It says that he's a retired supervisor, railway post office, and he's a survivor, and he lived in Spokane, which made sense because the train left from Spokane in the morning and came back to Spokane at night. So he even have his street address. Now, we don't know whether that's actually Mr. Sutherland that's in the picture. It's a good bet that it is, or could be. It's maybe 50-50 chance because they had to have two clerks for these short line runs. And of course, you could always have a substitute if one or the other was sick. But as a regular clerk, the person stepping out of the car looks about the age of the kind of person that's on this car, this citation. And so maybe that's it. So in summary, what you can do with a photograph, if you really have enough information, enough interest, you can develop one picture into a whole story. That's what I'm trying to communicate to everybody in this presentation. This may be the only picture that ever captured the Wallace and Spokane RPO. And there's not many pictures in northern Idaho. It was sparsely settled. Not very many photographers were going there. They might stick around Spokane and take pictures. Not very often were they going out into the hinterland. Now, the Pulse Railway Mail Service Library does not acquire photographs for the purpose of enhancing their value, but that's been accomplished by this research. The more you know about a photograph and the more you can say about it, it increases its intrinsic value and possibly its monetary value. But the point is, this is an example of what can be done using primary sources to document a photograph. And if you've got a picture of a railway post office and you know where it's taken and about when it's taken, do you want me to write a story about it? Bring it on. So with that, that's my presentation. We'll talk now questions. You can come off mute if you have any questions. And otherwise, then I'm going to show my contact information for the recording so that people who are not able to ask me questions right now, because this is a recording, can go ahead and contact me, and I'll be as responsive and prompt as I possibly can be. Any takers?
In one of the photographs in the of the inside of the car, what was the on the right-hand side of the picture? Some kind of a door underneath or something?
Go back. That's the floor plan of the car.
Floor plan of the car on the right.
Yeah. I'm getting there.
Got a peculiar name.
Okay.
Yeah. Go back. Yeah. What's that say? Door. What's a creep door? All the way on.
Creep door. Oh. In school they used to call me a creep. I guess that never happened to you, John.
Oh, they called me a lot of things.
No. They had a lot of names for me. Frank the Prank, and one for sheer too that I won't bother to repeat. But anyway, so underneath the distribution table, if you had a photograph of this car and you were looking head on from here, looking this direction, underneath this table, you would see that there's a little tiny rectangular door that's 2 feet wide, not very wide at all, but it's enough for you to go into the baggage or the express section, and it only unlocks from the inside of the railway post office car, so or in the railway post office apartment. So the express messengers suddenly couldn't put their head through and say, hey, you want some lunch or anything like that. But it was basically an escape route.
Yeah.
If there was a wreck, you couldn't for some reason use the side doors or whatever, that was available as possibly another access. Of course, this end here was not a blind end. It had a door that opened up. It had a latch that flipped on top of it, like a sliding bolt on both sides, you couldn't kick that door in. And it was a steel door. So, had side doors here. And just so that you know, when a railway postal clerk left the car, they would lock the door, this door from the inside, this door from the inside. Didn't have to do anything with that because it was already locked. And then maybe this door, they would slide it shut without, you can't be inside and lock it and then go out at the same time. Slide it shut. They take what's called a LA lock, which was the same kind of lock that was put on pouches, and every railway mail service clerk had the LA key for it. Put a lock on that. It had a little hasp that they could put the lock onto. So that's how you locked up the car if you had to go out of it. And then, of course, you use the LA key to get back in, and then unlock everything when you're occupied. So that's that. Anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, I have one, Frank. The clerk was an employee of the post office, you said. Did he have to be qualified on the railroad's book of rules, or did he have any obligation to know them?
No, none of that. And for you, Derek, traveling post office clerks in Great Britain did not have that requirement either. Canadian railway post office clerks did not have that requirement. They had their own rules. They had a what's called the Postal Laws and Regulations applicable to the railway mail service. They had a rule book that detailed everything they were supposed to do and what they could not do, and demerits that were assigned and merit points that they might get, all sorts of stuff. And it also explains that was called the service rating system, and also had other information in there. So they had two different exams. They had exams for all the states that they had to know. Then they had exams on the book of rules. And when you get on the railroad, I don't know how it was for most railroaders. I know I had to take a book of rules exam before I started working. But once I was working, I don't remember a situation where I had to retake the book of rules. Now, I was working summers. I come back the next summer or the summer after that. They didn't ask me to redo the book of rules. Maybe they should have, I don't know, but that was the way it was on the Chesapeake and Ohio Railway. But you had that exam once a year. You had to score at least 97% correct. And if you got 97 or a higher percentage, you're fine. Otherwise, you got demerits and you'd have to retake the exam. And if you didn't do well on the exam after 2 or 3 tries, you may as well be looking for another job. It was obvious that railway postal clerks the railway postal clerk life was not for you.
And those exams were knowing.
Those exams were knowing the distribution, all this stuff here.
Yeah. All those different
It's
stuff.
right here. See, yeah. This is one page. Yeah. Wait, where did it go? Schemes. This is page 41 out of a book that's probably got about 70 pages, let's say. You had to know, if you had Idaho as a study assignment, let's say there are 800 post offices in Idaho. You had to know what railway post office or what route served each one of those. And you had to be 97% correct on your examination.
You had to know the whole state or the
whole
job?
Whole state. And look, let's go back to the schedule here. Right here. So, working on train 67, you had to know, you had an examination on Idaho post offices. You also had an examination on Montana post offices. Montana, let's say, had about 1,000 post offices. Then you had Washington State, right here. You had maybe about another 1,000 post offices. You had 3 different states that you had to know. Now, Alberta, British Columbia, was a little different because as long as you knew what railway post office was going to make a connection into Alberta or British Columbia from the United States, you just threw the mail to that. Let the clerks that were actually on those lines be the ones who knew the specific railway post office routings within Canada. But so in addition, then this is the same clerk, goes one direction, comes back the other way. In addition to Idaho, Montana, Washington, they had to know North Dakota. They had to know the post office in Wyoming. You add it all together and you had 5,000 or 6,000 post offices, and a good clerk, because they worked various assignments during their career, they probably knew something close to the routing for about 10,000 post offices.
Jesus Christ.
All in your brain. You know? And the interesting thing for me is when I went to reunions, these guys hadn't been working mail for 20 years. You name of the town, like that, they tell you,
Jesus.
oh, that's such and such an RPO. That's Washington and Bristol. It's in Virginia.
Wow.
It got so ingrained. Part of the time, see this week on, week off, or several days on, several days off, and then a week off. They had to correct their schemes. They had to correct their schedules with general order updates that were being sent weekly. And they were expected to study for their exams with any changes. You know, it was a constantly changing world. Just because you knew what it was last month, might change this month, and might change again by the time you had your exam. You had to stay current. So there was a lot of study. It was almost constant study. And, you know, I've told people, I'll tell you, you all will probably figure this out. It's one thing to do railway post office research and sort of understand generally how it all fit together. I would have been a lousy railway post office clerk. I don't think I could have done this memorization. Well, maybe I could have, but, you know, you dedicate your life to it. It's much easier for me not to try to memorize anything. I just know what book to go look in, and what is written down is easy to remember. They did not have the reference available. They had to know it from memory when they were taking their exams, and have to do it at least 97% correct. Now, I will mention one other thing. 97% correct sounds, oh, that sounds really great. That means you're making 3 errors out of 100. And when you're throwing thousands of letters, that means that you're making mistakes. Let's say you sorted 1,000 letters, you made 300 mistakes or 30 mistakes. I guess 30. I can tell you I never was very good in math. But so you made those mistakes. But one of the things that happened was where you had railway postal clerks that were on one line, and if you made a mistake, somebody else caught it before it got too far. So, you know, you have the 97 or 98%. Some of these guys were actually hitting scores of 100%. You know, it wasn't like you made one mistake and next thing you know, that letter screwed up for the entire travel to its destination. Somebody else might have caught the mistake. They made different mistakes, but they caught it and forwarded the letter correctly, that particular letter. So, you know, it was sort of a self-correcting system.
That guy, that car, he worked by himself, though, didn't he?
This guy worked by himself, but you see his output. Now, I didn't go into this part down here. This is showing when train 67 is going west. When it's going west, yeah, so, okay, I'm sorry. The funny thing is, I guess it's going south, is what it is, 67 going south. So it's going out towards Wallace. You know, this is all just local dispatches. But when the train was coming back towards Spokane, that clerk was making mail up for, back in 1950, was making up for the airmail field in Spokane, was making up mail for the Miles City and Seattle West Division Train 1, Spokane and Portland Train 19 at Spokane, Spokane and Spokane, Washington Terminal Railway Post Office, which was a terminal facility. It was a stationary unit at Spokane. Also was sending mail back on train 67 if it went past the post office. And then the Williston and Seattle West Division 27 and Williston and Seattle Middle Division Train 2 was making all these connections. So, that's the whole thing about these railway post offices, that there was an interconnected network. It wasn't just this post office, Wallace and Spokane post office. You got to look at it in terms of an entire network and how this supported the entire network. It was like a spider web. And if a portion of the spider web is not strong enough, next thing you know, the spider web starts falling apart. And that's exactly what happened in the 1960s. They started eliminating lines. And as they eliminated lines, that web was less effective, and to the point where it really was no longer effective, and they cut it over to stationary mail processing units, and that's what we have today.
Any idea how many pieces of mail on the average he handled on going each way?
Well, I can tell you that a crew of 9 to 10 people in a full 60-foot car, the general metric was they handled about, collectively as a crew, about 10,000 pieces of mail. Now, you scale it back, if you got 10 clerks and it was 10,000 pieces of mail, probably 1,000. Now it's not very much, actually, when you get down to it, because these guys could pump letters into the distribution case at a letter about 1 every 5 seconds. It was like a machine gun with their arm going towards the case. And, they could work up the mail pretty quickly. And of course, that was the mail coming out of Spokane. And then as they stopped at stations, you could get a pouch, might have a few letter packages in there. By the time you got to the next station, you'd be pretty much work. So they were staying busy the whole time, but it wasn't. This is why it was a 15-foot apartment RPO. 15-foot was the smallest with just 1 clerk. This clerk did have to spend time with the registered mail. That's a very labor-intensive activity in terms of writing up the registry receipts and the reports and so on like that. This person was also essentially his own supervisor. So he had to fill out the trip report and the personnel report and the mail count. Had to fill all these forms out. That took a lot of time. So, even though it's 1,000 pieces of mail, let's say, maybe a little more, maybe a little less. Mail varies by day of the week. Mails on Monday is usually lightest because post offices are usually closed on Sunday. So people haven't mailed anything very much on Monday, and then next thing you know, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, they're higher. Friday might be a little bit of a deluge, and then Saturday it starts thinning down again. So every day it was a little different too, and weather played into that too. If it was bad weather, people just didn't bother going to the post office to mail things. It's like, I'll wait till the next day, kind of thing. So you had lots of ups and downs in terms of mail volume. 1,000 is probably, a reasonable number. And of course, after 1913, when you had the introduction of parcel post, the clerk was not working parcel post in the car unless it had special handling. That was an extra fee that you paid. So, but he was working newspapers and periodicals like magazines, like Life magazine. For those people who remember Life magazine and Saturday Evening Post and all that, they were working that up too. And
you say newspaper, Frank. You mean every day? Who's newspaper?
A daily newspaper, or sometimes a weekly newspaper.
Yeah.
A lot of people, a lot of newspapers went by mail. They had a preferential mailing rate.
Yeah.
And this is where, it's not just the letter communications. People, I think, underestimate what the post office was really doing back in the era before internet, before widespread use of the telephones. It was the chief communications link for the United States and the world, for that matter. It's hard for people today to visualize just what a pivotal role the post office played And as has often been said, the railway mail service was the backbone of the post office. People say that the railway postal clerks were the Marines of the post office department. I mean, they had tough conditions. They adapted to it. They did the work. So yes, newspapers were sorted, and you see, letter mail is one of those things that was important. But you get somebody who's sitting in Plummer, Idaho, and they're getting, I don't know what the name of the newspaper out of Spokane is, but whatever it is, if they were expecting Tuesday's edition on Tuesday at Plummer, Idaho, and it didn't show up till Wednesday, ooh, that was a big problem. They were writing their congressman, said, "Why is my newspaper delayed a whole day?" You would never think about doing that. And that's the thing about newspapers, because they are dated. People expected it at all particular time. That's where a lot of service complaints occurred. It wasn't so much with letter mail. And, to a lesser degree, magazines, if Saturday Evening Post was supposed to be in your mailbox by Saturday, being published by Curtis Publishing Company in Philadelphia, if it wasn't getting out to Idaho by the following Saturday, your congressman, you wrote your congressman.
Wow. Those towns that had a semicolon, you said the train didn't stop there, but there was a mail crane there. Am I correct?
That's correct. That's correct. Now, also, too, something to point out right here. If you can see my cursor, this NO, that stands for no office. There is no post office at Manitou. So, I'm not sure when they're catching the pouch. I believe what that was doing, and I'm not going to bother flipping back to the post route map. My expectation is you had a star route or a mail messenger going to some post office that was offline and taking the mail there. Same thing with this NP crossing, no office.
So there was a mail crane there. Somebody put the mail in it. Somebody picked up the sack on the ground.
That's right.
And who was the somebody?
That somebody was a mail messenger or a star route carrier. That's somebody. Star route carrier was a contractor. Mail messengers were contractors too, but mail messengers were usually arranged by the postmaster of a post office to pick up mail. It was more local. You bring the mail to a post office maybe a mile away. Star routes were going some further distance, 20, 30 miles sometimes. And the reason why it's called star route is because in the contracts, it was represented by 3 asterisks. The 3 asterisks look like stars, and they represented the words celerity, certainty, and security. That the star route carrier, the contractor, had to perform service with speed, with reliability, and they had to keep the mail secure. So that's where this term star route comes from. The post office has lots of strange, curious names that have been carried through to today. Star routes existed in the early 1800s. They still use the term star routes today. How many other businesses do you know almost 2 centuries later or more are still using? Well, no, I'm sorry. We're talking to a bunch of railroaders now. We all know what pull the pin means.
Yeah.
And when you get to be retirement, you're pulling the pin.
Yeah.
So, any other questions?
Hey,
Frank.
Yes, go ahead, Al.
The illustration you had of the car's interior, was the cars heated by steam from steam locomotives, or was there something else in there? Because I didn't see a stove or anything like that.
No. Early cars did not have generators. Early cars did not have steam heat. And they're not showing the radiators in here. You're right, but there would basically be 4 radiators along here on either side of the door, and then you had this right here, right by the doorway, where you open up the door in the winter. Ooh, it gets so cold. that was basically a large galvanized pipe that wrapped, it was like a serpentine back and forth with fins, and it was throwing a lot of heat into this specific area right in the door. You stand in this doorway to load or unload mail or to make a catch, and especially if it's a catch and it's going along, even if it's only 30 or 40 miles an hour, that wind will bite you. So steam heat. There was a steam line under the car, and of course the electricity was because there was a generator under the car. It usually is belt driven. It had batteries, as you would expect for any of the other passenger cars. Now, this is one of the things that a lot of people don't realize. John knows all about steam generators. He can, and John, to whom I'm talking during this recording, not just this recorded version. As an engineer, well, as a fireman, you had responsibility for the steam generator. That was the problem when they dieselized. You don't have any steam coming out of the boiler anymore, so you got to put a boiler into the diesel locomotive so that you could still heat the train, because the train cars predated the existence of of diesel locomotives. So, and steam generators were problematic. They didn't always work. And plus that, in the winter, I don't know if they had it at Spokane. I'm sorry, at Wallace, but I'm sure at Spokane, where they parked this car, they had to have a steam line from a roundhouse or someplace like that, where they had a furnace, and they were supplying steam heat. You had to keep the car cold. Otherwise, any of the moisture that was in the steam line was going to condense and then it's going to freeze. Next thing you know, you got a broken pipe, and you get the car knockers out there and they say, oh, well, this car's out of service. No heat. So I will mention something else. Sometimes, even with the steam heating, in bitter cold weather, and I'll tell you, it gets cold in Idaho in the winter. A lot of the Clarks, even with the steam heat, they couldn't keep warm enough. They would take a sack, and a number 2 sack, which is, let's say, 48 inches high, and it has a pull cord around it. They'd actually pull a sack up over their legs and over their shoes, and that 48 inches came up to about mid-waist, and pulled that tie cord snug. And that provided an extra layer of insulation. And of course, sacks were great. When you were ready to take a nap, you found a few sacks, laid them out. You were dead tired. It felt like a feather bed. It's dirty as hell. Those things have been dragged across platforms. They were soiled and everything like that. But when you're tired and you're looking for a flat surface to lay on that's relatively soft, oh, it felt so good. So, the only thing a single clerk couldn't do in a car was play poker at the end of the run. That was, you get the cruise of in a full RPO. That's what they talk about more than anything else. They were working up the mail so they could spend 5 minutes playing penny ante poker at the end of the run. Maybe get a few hands done. See who won. So anyway, Al, that's you ask a simple question. I give you a very roundabout answer, but yes, it was steam, and you don't see it. It was along the baseboards.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
What was that book that you recommended that I bought? I'm looking at my books. I know I bought the one about it. It's actually a fabulous book. It tells the whole story, how everything worked.
Well, there's 2 things. One, Mail by Rail by Brian Long and Dennis. That's a good one, but that only takes you to 1951. Then there was another one that was published called Mail and Express by Rail, I think it was. Unfortunately, the person who authored it died about 2 years after the book was published. But it's available on eBay. It's available on Amazon. I personally don't use Amazon. I can't find it on eBay. It doesn't exist. But it's called Mail and Express by Rail. And as seems to be the case for me now that I'm 74, I'm not conjuring up the author's name very well. but it has a lot of great photographs. And it does more than what I do. I mean, I'm only talking about the railway mail service. It has a lot of information about how Railway Express was handled. And that's an equally interesting subject. And I don't know very many people that really get into Railway Express as a subject material. Any other questions?
Frank, were these RPO clerks armed?
Yes, there were. Up until about 1963 or so, every one of them, well, not during the entire history. In 1921, 22, 23, 24, there was a spat of robberies. And so the Post Office Department came up with the decision of arming the clerks. And for about a year, they actually assigned Marines on there. Marines had a very simple instruction. They had like 10 guidelines. About half of them basically say, shoot to kill in some variation. You fire a warning shot, and if they don't stop what they're doing, shoot to kill. That would not be very popular today. We got to read the Miranda rights and everything else. You look like you're trying to hold up this car. You have Marines in there. They know they're open for business. Put it that way. But that didn't last very well, because actually that was a very difficult assignment for the Marines, because you're standing around the whole time. You've got to be on your guard the whole time for 10, 12 hours. It was boring. Really boring, And the number of robberies, obviously, once the crooks found out that there were arms in the car, the number of robberies started to decline. But anyway, to get back to your question, so in 1924, so they took a whole bunch of Colt U.S. Army new service revolvers, 45, 4 or 5 inch barrels, something like that, and they assigned them to all the clerks. You carry a 45 revolver with a lanyard loop or on your holster, on your belt, for 12 hours, you're going to feel it by the end of the trip. And so after a lot of complaints, the Post Office Department shifted it to basically something less than half the weight. It was a 38 caliber, 2 inch barrel, Colt Banker Special or Detective Special or Police Positive. All of those models were used, with the Banker Special being the most common one, and the one, if you talk to any railway postal clerk, which if you find a railway postal clerk to talk to, I sure would like to know it, because there's not many left. But they'll, if you ask about the gun, they'll almost always say Banker Special. They don't necessarily know that it's a Colt. And it was marked on the back, RMS, PO Department, well, PODEPT, and on the bottom it had a number, so it was issued to the clerk. Now, you would think the clerks, it might be nice to go ahead and lose that gun. I want to keep that as a souvenir. Don't do that, because the Postal Inspection Service will be watching you for stolen postal property. You might pay for the gun, and if they caught you with it, you had stolen postal property. You'd lose your job. You might go to jail. For that reason, very, very few of them survive. What the back part of that story is, they were all sent to the there was a Eastern Area Supply Center for the Postal Service at Somerville, New Jersey, in a Veterans Administration depot, and that happened to be located on the Lehigh Valley Railroad. I've been there, seen the cage that they had thousands, maybe tens of thousands of firearms in there. Everything from these pistols to Thompson machine guns and shotguns and everything else. So I didn't go into that cage. It's locked. They had an inventory for all that stuff. And eventually the inspection service said, melt them down. They took them over 10,000 firearms, probably more than that, took them to a foundry in New Jersey and melted them all down. So as a result, some of these guns are fairly scarce, but you can go to Gunbroker and see one just about once a month. There's one guy who's got one. He's been listing it several weeks, maybe months now. That he wants $3,200 as the starting bid. Highest I'll go is about $1,000. I don't brag, but I've got, first of all, I've got a federal firearms license for curios and relics. And no, John, I've never shot a gun. Don't even keep ammunition. But I've got enough of these that I've bought over the past 30, 40 years. I could equip an entire 10-person crew, if not more. So they're an interesting artifact, but they are an artifact. They are not for use. Plus that, they haven't been checked by a gunsmith to find out that they're really serviceable. I mean, the last thing you want to do is pull it into something that's not been checked, that the condition of the barrel is safe and all of that, and it's got a tight, the cylinders locking up tight. You could blow the gun apart and blow you apart too. I don't take that risk. I'll tell you what, this Railway Mail Service Library, it has things that I shouldn't have. How do you think about that? That's why I don't really tell very much about what's inside of that building behind me. But let me share that with you. I've got a gold box that was used by the Denver Mint for moving gold. Put gold bars in it. Now that was legally procured, wasn't stolen. But I don't know very many of those floating around. So I've got other things as well. That's the reason why I set up this Railway Mail Service Library Foundation. This collection's got to stay intact beyond my lifetime and for several lifetimes after that. And really, somebody needs to carry the torch and keep all this going. It's a fascinating part of railroad and postal history. But, kids are playing so many video games these days, it's hard to get them to take their eyes off of their Chromebooks. So I don't know. That remains to be seen. Does anybody else have any other questions?
Well, Frank, I have something distantly related to what you're doing, if I may share it once you're done.
Okay, well, I'm going to flash this up here. So anybody that does have any questions later on, this is in the notes pages. You can get me at fshear@railwaymailservicelibrary.org, or you can do f_shear@yahoo.com, which is a little shorter. You can write a letter. I actually pick up mail at 117 East Main Street, and I'll answer. So I appreciate you all taking the time. If there's no other questions, I appreciate your attendance, and
Frank,
glad that this all worked out. Yes.
Frank, question. How'd you get into this? What kicked you off to you to do this?
Oh, you got another half hour?
No, I don't want a half an hour explanation, but
You want?
I mean, it is a
short version.
It is a fairly narrow
Niche.
niche.
I can give you the short version.
Okay.
Okay. I was in high school. Most of us that got interested in railroads, either it was when we were elementary, middle, or high school. And railroads were going right by my house near enough. Okay, so I had a pen pal who was a lousy letter writer, but my dad had been sending letters by railway post office when he was working for Hartford Steam Boiler Insurance Company. He says, well, if you take the letter on down to the train and put it on the train, it'll get there faster. Very simple logic. Now, convincing me to go down to a train station and wait for a train, and a railroad detective's not going to throw you off the platform if you say, oh, I've got a letter, I'm going to mail it on that railway post office. You've got a reason for being there. You don't have a ticket, but you can be there. And same thing at Washington Terminal. I got all over the place in Washington Terminal because I was carrying letters to mail on our RPOs. So anyway, I'd mail it, and next thing you know, I'm getting to, because I'm seeing the same clerks over and over and over. I'm learning their names because they had closed off those letter slots. You had to hand it to a clerk. Next thing you know, I started going to reunions, and then next thing you know, some of the clerks are, they are moving into assisted care, or they're moving to Florida, or wherever they're going, and they say, you know, I got this stuff in the attic, I got stuff in the basement, I'll give it to you. And then there was a fellow in Florida that I bought his entire collection in Paisley, Florida. And I've been doing this for 50 years. Just like a lot of you all have been chasing whatever interest you have for half a century.
Right.
And that's how I got into it. So sometime, if you want to schedule me for about 2 hours, I can go through the full story, but you know, that's a separate conversation.
I appreciate you sharing that. That's great.
Yeah, it's you know, there's not very many. I will say one other thing, that, you know, some people go through life and they really don't have any direction. They haven't got an interest that carries them forward, a focal point that they want to try to achieve. And that came along at the right time for me because it gave me something that I could focus on. I've been doing it ever since. Now, you know, unfortunately, this is not a good time for museums. You don't make a living at this. But, you know, it's going well. I've got a lot to show for it. I'm leaving a legacy.
Yeah.
With that, I'm going to sign off, folks.
Thank you very much,
Let's
Frank.
get to the
Frank.
other position. And now,
Very interesting.
That was awesome.
well,
Thank you, Frank. Thank
glad
you.
you all enjoyed it. And
Thank you, Frank.
now I'm going to stop my recording.
Thank you, Frank. Terrific work.